Studies Section 8, The Problem of Meaning. Introduction. So far, we have been discussing the idea of language, communication, knowledge, and understanding as if it is a smooth issue to transfer ideas, meaning and thought from the sender to the receiver without any remainder. In this lecture, we will examine the meaning of meaning. In other words, we want to critically look at what we transfer when we communicate with others. Learning outcomes for study section 8. When you have studied this study section, you should be able to identify the problem inherent in the communication process, state adequately the difficulties in language that may hinder communication, explain the problem of meaning in the philosophy of language. Meaning and its linguistic nature. Imagine that someone just told you something. Then you nodded and replied, "I understand what you mean." This simple example tells us something important about the communication process. This is that when we communicate, what we are attempting to do is to transfer meaning or what we mean to others. In other words, we put a sense into certain signs and symbols, and we hope that when these signs get to the other person, she or he will be able to decode what we mean. The idea of meaning could therefore be linguistic in form or extra-linguistic. Definition of linguistics. Linguistics is the scientific study of language. Linguistics could therefore be deduced from concepts that the words of the sender express or through the context in which the sender uttered the words. It is extra-linguistic when it is not communicated through language. Meaning in this extra-linguistic sense often refers to the interpretation that a person has about phenomena in the world. For instance, a person could be asked about the meaning she or he read into a movie, an action, or a situation. The second sense in which meaning can be extra-linguistic is the sense in which body language communicates something to others. This body language flows from body signals like tears, blushing, and so on. Extra-linguistic meaning could also be natural or pragmatic. It is natural when a particular sign is associated with a natural event. For instance, when you see a weather vane pointing in a direction, we take that to mean that the wind is pointing in that direction. Meaning is pragmatic if we take it to derive from the consequences of an expression. When we talk of a light bulb, the consequence of light bulb might be the capacity to be able to read at night. The main reason for communication is dash, to transfer meaning to others. Understanding the problem of meaning. In philosophy, there is a serious concern with the nature and understanding of what meaning means. This is important because it is not all the time that one can confidently say, "I understand what you mean." The issue becomes complicated if we had to act on what we could turn out to be a wrong interpretation of meaning. An illustration of wrong interpretation of meaning. There is a famous story about the relationship between Thomas Becket, the 12th century Archbishop of Canterbury, and King Henry II of England. The friends clashed over the interpretation of the church's relationship to the common law of England. The disagreement between them led to the exile of Thomas Becket. When Becket returned from exile, he became too temperamental for King Henry to bear. So one day, King Henry exclaimed, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 of King Henry's knights who heard this exclamation misinterpreted it as a call to action. On December 29, 1170, these 4 knights murdered Thomas Becket right in the cathedral. The significance of this story is that actions can emanate from a misinterpretation of meaning and intention. King Henry was only exclaiming his seeming impotence with regard to Becket. The 4 knights thought he was giving them a direct order. Such misinterpretations derive from ambiguities and vagueness which are intrinsic to language. Ambiguity. Ambiguity refers to the property which a linguistic expression has to encode more than one meaning. On the other hand, a linguistic expression is vague if it has no uniquely determinable value or interpretation. Let us consider an example each of these concepts. Consider a statement like, I have brought the seal. This statement is ambiguous because the word seal could refer to either a sea creature or a device for closing up and opening. To therefore say, I have brought the seal, leaves the error undecided on what the speaker is saying. Again, consider another statement, black ties and trousers. How do we interpret this statement? Are we talking about ties and trousers that are black, or to only ties that are black and to trousers whose color is indeterminate? Other ambiguous words would include bride, bank, apothecary, biweekly, good, and so on. What about vague statement? Consider the man is rich. The concept of rich has a whole range of interpretation such that it becomes difficult to pin down a specific meaning. To be rich could range from having 10,000 naira to having 10 billion naira. The same could be said for words like painful, child, triangle, etc. These examples are important considerations in a philosopher's interest in what constitutes meaning according to Lacan. Dash and dash can lead to misinterpretation of a statement, ambiguity and vagueness. Meaning and its linguistic difficulties. That certain kinds of marks and noises have meanings, and that we human beings grasp those meanings without even thinking about it are very striking facts. A philosophical theory of meaning should explain what it is for a string of marks or noises to be meaningful, and then more particularly what it is in virtue of which the string has the distinctive meaning it does. The theory should also explain how it is possible for human beings to produce and to understand meaningful utterances and to do that so effortlessly. The diagram below illustrates how meaning is transmitted. Figure 8.2, Phases of communication. Speech sounds, talking, understanding, play, attention, and listening. Understanding the nature of meaning is different from understanding the human capacity to produce speech. What interests philosophers is the nature of linguistic expressions themselves and how they can constitute meanings. Let's take another look at linguistic expressions and outline why they are considered significant by philosophers. 1. Singing lawn party in Sesant University. 2. Everybody has the right to disenfranchise him or herself. These two represent different sequences of linguistic signs with different consequences for meaning and meaningfulness. Sequence 1 is therefore different from 2, which is a sentence containing individual meaningful words linked to make sense. Sequence 3 is simply nonsense. We can therefore say that sequence 2 exhibits the unique property of meaning something. Lacan then lists what he considers the data from which the philosophical study of language must begin. They include some strings of marks or noises and meaningful sentences. Each meaningful sentence means something in particular. Competent speakers of a language are able to understand many of that language's sentences. Without effort and almost instantaneously, they also produce sentences in the same way. Philosophical theory of meaning. Philosophers of language prioritize their inquiry on the nature of meaning. They seek to explain the following: what it means to mean something. What then is the nature of these meanings that we communicate to others? How do we know that meaning has been communicated? Are meanings entities? If they are entities, what kind of entities are they? Are they similar to the chairs and tables around us? If they are not entities, what then are they? Philosophers have constructed several theories that attempt to explain the nature and meaning of the meanings we communicate in meaningful sentences. Below are some of the theories. 1. Referential theory. 2. Idea theory. 3. Use theory. 4. Verification theory. 5. Pragmatist theory. 1. Referential theory. The most influential and commonsensical of these theories is the referential theory. The simple idea behind this theory is that linguistic expressions have meanings because they stand for something outside of themselves. Therefore, what an expression means is what that expression stands for in reality. If I say, for example, University of Ibadan, that linguistic sequence is meaningful because it represents a particular entity, an institution of higher learning in the world. One could also say something like, the book is under the table. In this case, the book represents a particular book, the table a particular table, and its under will stand for the idea of being under. This theory is influential because it seems natural as an explanation of what gives linguistic expression meaning. This is my dog only conveys meaning to me because I actually see a dog beside you on a leash. However, our familiarity with this theory hides serious philosophical problems. In the first place, just as we have names that denote real things in the world, we also employ names which stand for non-existing things. For example, one could say, Pegasus is a flying horse. If an expression is meaningful because it represents a particular state of affairs in reality, what then would Pegasus represent? One could also have a statement like, I saw nobody, in which nobody would not represent anything. We might also have other words like fact, anyone, what, abstract, behalf of, very, yes, and so on, which are meaningful but do not really denote anything. 2. Idea theory. Meaning, according to this theory, represent mental content or ideas which linguistic expressions stand for. In this sense, a linguistic expression is not meaningful because it stands for a state of affair in reality. Rather, it is meaningful because it represents a particular idea which the speaker intends to communicate to the hearer. Thus, if I utter a statement like, I want to study physics, this statement is meaningful because it conveys a certain idea I wish to pass across. These ideas or mental images are private and therefore independent of language. The function of language in this context is to convey these images to others. The extent to which a linguistic expression is able to indicate these ideas or make them public is what makes the expression meaningful. This idea is powerful because it gives us the obvious insight that the function of language is to communicate thought from one person to another. For instance, it resolves the problem of finding a reference for those words of, yes, what, yes, etc., which are really meaningful to us, but has no reference to point at. Unfortunately, the theory makes the issue of meaning too private to enable communication. Use theory. This theory claims that the meaning of linguistic expressions is not an entity, but rather can be found in the use which the expression serves. In other words, a word or expression means what competent users of that language say it means. Kitchen, for the competent speakers of the English language, means a place where cooking is done. If a speaker of the Yoruba language utters a word like "Mami" within the Yoruba linguistic community, that expression signifies or means something which may be different from the same sign sequence in another culture. The use theorist would therefore say we should not ask for the meaning of a linguistic expression, rather, we should ask for its use within a conventional practice. The conventional rules governing a particular linguistic community grants the framework by which words and linguistic expressions are used. In this sense, not all expressions will refer to entities. The essential idea behind this theory is that it sees meaning as an intersubjective matter among people. For Peregrine, indeed, the point of meaning is that it can be shared by many, that new people can always enter the realm of a language, learning the meaning of its words and then participating in the language games staged by its means. The idea of intersubjective nature of meaning gives the use theory an edge over the ideal theory of meaning. Verification theory. According to this theory, what makes a linguistic expression meaningful is the method which leads to the verification of that expression. In other words, a statement like "the cat is on the roof" is immediately meaningful because the hearer knows by what means she or he can go about proving or demonstrating the meaning. Therefore, the truth or falsity of that statement, that is, by the empirical method of checking the roof to see if the cat is really there. If a proposition or a linguistic expression can't be verified, then that statement is meaningless. For instance, statements like "God exists," "stealing is morally wrong," "souls are immortal," and so on. Pragmatist theory. The meaning of a linguistic expression or a statement, according to the pragmatist, is determined by the consequence of the application of that statement. This theory, following Charles Peirce, the American philosopher, derives from the pragmatic maxim: consider what effects that might conceivably have practical bearings we conceive the object of our conception to have. Then our conception of this effect is the whole of our conception of the object. By implication, a pragmatist theory is not concerned with the relationship between a statement or an intentional experience and an objective reality which the statement is supposed to correspond to. Rather, meaning derives from the relationship between the statement and human experience. As a relation rather than an entity, meaning for the pragmatist involves three terms: a sign, what the sign stands for or what it signifies, and the response or effect produced by the sign. These three constitute the relations of meaning. Summary for Studies Section 8. In this Studies section, you have learned that 1. The role that the nature and problem of meaning plays in the communication process. When we communicate with others, what we are doing is conveying intended meanings to others. We note, however, that 2. Meaning could be mistaken when communicated. This could be due to the inherent ambiguity or vagueness in our linguistic expressions. 3. If ambiguity and vagueness could therefore interfere with the communication process, then there is the need to understand the nature of meaning itself as what is crucial in language and the communication process. Thus, the philosopher reasoned, if we could achieve an understanding of what meanings are, then we may actually know when meaning has been communicated. 4. The crucial question for the philosopher, therefore, is: in what sense do linguistic expressions like statements constitute meaning, which we then communicate to others? There are several answers to this question. We examine 5 such answers in the lecture. 5. The referential theory, which is the most obvious of all the theories of meaning, sees meaning as being constituted by reference to an external state of affairs. 6. In the idea theory of meaning, meanings are ideas or mental images that linguistic expressions represent. 7. In the use theory, meaning is not really an entity which a statement attempts to signify. Meaning is the conventional use of the expression as agreed to by competent users of the language. 8. The verification theory of meaning conceives meaning as deriving from the empirical method of verifying the linguistic expression carrying the meaning. Finally, 9. The pragmatist theory interprets meaning as being the consequence of the application of an expression. This is the end of study section 8. Thanks for listening.